The first time my daughter called me trash, she was already in labor. The second time, she made sure an entire hospital corridor heard it. "Get him out of here." Her voice echoed so loudly that nurses stopped walking. "This isn't really your moment. You're just trash." Then she laughed. Not an embarrassed laugh, not a nervous laugh, the kind of laugh that tells you someone believes they've already won. My son-in-law slipped his arm around her shoulders and smirked. "I think you've heard her." Behind them, his mother folded her arms with a satisfied smile. One security guard had already started walking toward me. I looked through the glass window of the delivery suite. Just once. My first grandchild was only minutes away from being born. For 9 months. I'd imagined that moment. Instead, I watched the automatic doors close in my face. I nodded politely. "I understand." Nobody noticed I wasn't looking at my daughter anymore. I was looking at the hospital board hanging on the opposite wall, a list of donors who had funded the new maternity wing. Most people walked past it without reading. I didn't, because my name wasn't on it. Not anymore. My name is Victor Hale. I'm 73 years old. For 38 years I owned Hale Medical Systems, a company that designed neonatal monitoring equipment used in hospitals across the state. I wasn't a billionaire. I wasn't famous. But whenever a premature baby survived because an alarm detected trouble in time, there was a good chance one of my engineers had helped make that possible. My wife, Eleanor, used to say we had the luckiest business in America. We don't just make equipment, we help babies come home. She believed that until the day cancer took her, after she died, nothing felt important anymore. Not awards, not money, not even retirement. So 5 years earlier, I sold my shares in the company. The proceeds guaranteed I'd never have to worry about money again. I kept one thing, a private charitable foundation Eleanor and I had quietly created years earlier. We never announced it, never held press conferences, never asked for plaques. The foundation simply paid for things hospitals couldn't afford. NICU incubators, children's heart monitors, scholarships for neonatal nurses, and occasionally, entire maternity renovations. No publicity, just gratitude from people who never knew our names. My daughter Brooke knew the foundation existed. She simply assumed it had stopped after I retired. She never asked. Then again, Brooke hadn't asked me much of anything in years. When she was 26, she married Grant. He came from money, or at least, he came from a family that liked everyone believing they had money. Luxury cars leased, Dundar clothes financed. Vacations paid with reward points and credit cards. Everything looked perfect from the outside. The performance mattered more than the truth. At first, they still visited. Birthdays, Thanksgiving, Christmas. Then Grant's mother, Denise, slowly became the center of every family decision. Holiday dinners moved to Denise's house. Vacations became Denise's vacations. Even baby names became Denise's opinion. Every year, I drifted a little farther away. Not because I argued, because I refused to compete. Then Brooke announced she was pregnant. For one brief moment, I thought everything would change. I offered to build the nursery furniture myself. She said Grant's parents had already ordered imported Italian pieces. I offered to pay for a private birthing class. She said Denise had booked a luxury parenting retreat. I asked if she'd like her mother's antique rocking chair restored. She replied with one sentence: "It doesn't match our aesthetic." I stopped offering. Still, every month I quietly mailed children's books, savings bonds, college fund contributions, never expecting praise, just hoping one day my grandchild would know someone had loved them before they were even born. Then, 2 weeks before the due date, Brooke called. "I'll text you when labor starts." I'd love that. "But don't come unless I invite you." Those words hurt. Still, as I respected them. 3 days later, my phone rang at 4:17 in the morning. "Grant, we're at St. Catherine's." Then the line disconnected. No explanation, no warning. Just enough for a father to believe he was wanted. I drove 45 minutes through heavy rain. Bought flowers Eleanor would have loved. Picked up Brooke's favorite lemon tea on the way. By the time I reached the maternity floor, Grant's parents were already there. Denise hugged nurses like she owned the hospital. Grant's father was handing expensive gift baskets to the staff. Everyone smiled, until they saw me. Denise whispered something into Brooke's ear. Brooke looked toward me. Her expression hardened instantly. "What are you doing here?" "Grant called me." She looked at her husband. He shrugged. "I only told him where we were." Brooke walked straight toward me. "This isn't really your moment." The hallway became quiet. I thought she was angry because she was scared. I took another step. "I only wanted to." She cut me off. "No, you always make everything about yourself." Then she pointed toward the elevators. "You're just trash." She laughed. "So please, take yourself to the curb where trash belongs." A nurse looked down at the floor. Even she seemed uncomfortable. Grant didn't say a word. Neither did Denise. Neither stopped it. The security guard finally reached us. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to leave." I handed him the flowers. "They're for my daughter." Then I turned around. No shouting, no begging, no tears. As the elevator doors closed, my phone vibrated. It wasn't Brooke. It was my attorney. Only 6 words appeared on the screen. "The board approved everything this morning." I looked back one last time toward the maternity floor. Brooke thought she'd just thrown an unwanted old man out of the delivery room. She had no idea. She had just thrown out the man who was about to decide where the largest charitable gift in the hospital's history would go. I didn't go home. I drove to the old brick building, Eleanor, and I had purchased 23 years earlier. There was no company logo outside, no fancy sign, just a small bronze plate that read, "The Eleanor Hale Foundation." Most people thought it was a private investment office. That misunderstanding had always suited us. Inside, my attorney, Caroline Mercer, was already waiting. She looked at my face for exactly 2 seconds before pushing a cup of coffee toward me. "So, it happened," I nodded. "Worse than I expected." She didn't ask for details. She simply slid a thick folder across the conference table. "The board signed everything this morning." I opened it. Inside were architectural drawings, financial schedules, construction contracts. At the top of the first page, one number stood out: $42 million. Eleanor and I had planned the gift for almost 4 years, not because St. Catherine's Hospital needed money, because their maternity and neonatal departments had become dangerously overcrowded. The project would build an entirely new women's and children's center, private delivery suites, a larger NIC, a family counseling center, housing for parents with premature babies. Everything Eleanor had dreamed about before she died. The only condition attached to our donation was simple. The foundation retained complete discretion over the final recipient until the public announcement. Nothing had been signed with St. Catherine's yet. Caroline looked at me carefully. "You don't have to decide today. I've already decided one thing." "What?" "I'm not making this decision as Brooke's father. I'm making it as Eleanor's trustee." She smiled slightly. "That's why she trusted you." An hour later, my phone rang. "Grant," I answered. "Hello." His voice sounded strangely cheerful. "Dad, Brooke had apparently decided we should pretend nothing happened. Everything's fine. We had a beautiful baby girl. I'm glad she's healthy." There was an awkward pause. "You can come visit tomorrow." I looked at the folder in front of me. "No." Silence. "I thought you wanted to meet your granddaughter." "I do, but not because someone finally found it convenient." His tone hardened. "Brooke was emotional. So was I. You shouldn't take it personally." I almost laughed. "She called me trash in front of an entire hospital. Grant, how exactly should I take that?" He had no answer. Instead, he changed the subject. "By the way, the hospital administrator wants to invite our family to next month's fundraising gala." "Interesting. So you've already heard." "Heard what?" "The hospital's expecting a major donor." I leaned back quietly. Grant continued talking. "They're hoping my parents can help with introductions." "Of course." Denise had already started inserting herself into something she knew nothing about. I ended the call after wishing the baby good health. Nothing more. The following morning, Caroline entered my office carrying another folder. "I did something you asked." She handed me a report. "Brackle research. Not on Brooke, on Grant's family specifically. Denies." I read quietly, then I stopped. "You're kidding." "I wish I were." 3 years earlier, Denise had approached the foundation, requesting nearly $1.8 million to establish a maternal wellness center. The application had been rejected. Not because the idea was bad, because nearly 80% of the proposed budget consisted of executive salaries, consulting fees, luxury office renovations, and administrative expenses. Only a fraction would have helped actual mothers. Caroline folded her hands. She appealed twice, both times rejected, so she knows this foundation very well. I looked toward the window, which explained something. Denise had recognized my last name years ago. She knew exactly who I was, yet she had never once encouraged Brooke to reconnect with me, not because she disliked me, because she assumed my money would eventually belong to Brooke anyway. As long as I stayed quiet, she didn't need me, until now. 3 days later, the hospital officially announced a press conference. Rumors spread quickly. News stations speculated about a historic charitable gift. Employees whispered about an expansion larger than anything the hospital had ever seen. Then my phone began ringing, not from journalists, from Brooke. 23 missed calls, 7 voicemails. I listened to only one. "Dad, I just found out. Were you the donor?" No apology, no mention of what she'd said, just curiosity. An hour later, another voicemail arrived, this time, Denise. "Victor, I think we've had some misunderstandings. I'd love for our families to have dinner." I smiled to myself. 3 days ago, I was trash. Now, I was family again. Caroline looked at me from across the table. "What are you thinking?" I closed the folder. "I'm thinking Eleanor always believed generosity reveals people's character, and so does losing access to it." Just then, my assistant knocked on the door. "The CEOs from both St. Catherine's Hospital and Riverside Medical Center are here." 2 hospitals, 1 donation, 1 decision. I quietly stood up, because for the first time, the future of an entire maternity hospital would depend on a man who had been told he didn't belong in a delivery room. I met with both hospital boards on the same afternoon. Not together, one after the other. The first meeting lasted 23 minutes. The second lasted almost 2 hours. The difference had nothing to do with money. It had everything to do with people. St. Catherine's executives spent most of the meeting talking about naming rights, press coverage, television interviews, political guests. One administrator even slid a rendering across the table. Across the top of the building was written, "The Hail Woman Centri," quietly pushed it back. "You've already named it." He smiled. "We assumed you'd be honored. I wasn't asked." His smile faded, then he recovered quickly. "We thought it was obvious. Nothing about generosity should ever be obvious, especially not before the gift was accepted." Later that afternoon, I met the leadership team at Riverside Medical Center. No cameras, no architects, no media consultants, only doctors, nurses, and one woman wearing faded blue scrubs. She introduced herself. "I'm Dr. Naomi Ellis, Director of Neonatal Medicine." Instead of asking about the donation, she showed me photographs. Tiny premature babies, Krents sleeping beside incubators, families living in waiting rooms because they couldn't afford hotels. One picture stopped me, a father sleeping on the floor beside his newborn daughter. Using his folded jacket as a pillow, Naomi noticed me staring. He refused to leave. He said if his daughter opened her eyes, he wanted her first memory to be her father. Nobody in that room mentioned plaques. Nobody mentioned my name. Only babies. By the time the meeting ended, my decision had already been made. 3 days later, the invitations for St. Catherine's fundraising gala arrived. Apparently, Brooke and Grant had already accepted. So had Denise. She was even listed as one of the evening's honorary hosts. Interesting. Very interesting. Caroline looked over the guest list. "They're expecting to celebrate before you've even signed. They've mistaken confidence for certainty." The night of the gala, the ballroom glittered with crystal chandeliers, doctors, politicians, business owners, television reporters, nearly 600 guests. I arrived through a private entrance, not because I wanted attention, because I wanted to observe before anyone noticed me. Across the room, I spotted Brooke. She looked radiant holding my granddaughter. For one brief second, I almost walked over. Then I remembered the delivery room. "You're just trash. Some words don't disappear because a baby is born." Grant noticed me first. His face turned white. He whispered something to Brooke. She turned for several seconds. Neither of us moved. Then, she started walking toward me. "Dad." Her voice sounded softer than it had in years. "I've been trying to call." "I know. I'm sorry if," she swallowed. "I shouldn't have said those things. I looked into her eyes. Which things? Silence. Calling you trash or throwing you out. Tears began forming, both. Before I could answer, Denise appeared beside her wearing an expensive evening gown. She smiled as though we were lifelong friends. Victor, I've been looking everywhere for you. She leaned in for a hug. I stepped back. Her smile froze. We're so excited about tonight. We've already discussed how wonderful it'll be having the new maternity center here. We? She laughed awkwardly. Our family. I looked around the ballroom. Interesting. She still believed the decision had already been made. Then the hospital president walked onto the stage. The room became silent. Ladies and gentlemen, tonight marks the beginning of the largest philanthropic partnership in our hospital's history. Applause filled the ballroom. A giant screen behind him displayed architectural drawings, the same ones I'd rejected. He smiled proudly. We're honored that Mr. Victor Hale has joined us this evening. Spotlights swept across the room until they found me. Hundreds of faces turned. Brooks smiled nervously. Grant exhaled in relief. Denise actually began clapping before I had even moved. The president continued. We're grateful Mr. Hale chose St. Catherine's to receive this transformational $42 million investment. I slowly stood, walked toward the stage, accepted the microphone. For several seconds, I said nothing. The silence grew heavy. Then I smiled politely. I'm afraid there seems to have been a misunderstanding. The ballroom became perfectly still. I haven't chosen St. Catherine's. The hospital president blinked. I'm sorry? I turned toward the audience. My late wife believed generosity should reward compassion, not assumptions. I visited 2 hospitals this week. Only one remembered that patients matter more than publicity. Across the ballroom, Denise's smile disappeared. Brooks' face lost all color. The president looked as though someone had pulled the floor out from under him. I continued. Therefore, the Eleanor Hale Foundation will invest $42 million in Riverside Medical Center. Complete silence. Then, thunderous applause erupted from the guests who understood what had just happened. Television cameras immediately swung away from the hospital executives. Toward me, the president of St. Catherine's stood frozen beside the podium. Then I looked directly toward Brooke. Not with anger, with disappointment. The last time I stood inside your hospital, I wasn't treated like a father. I wasn't even treated like a human being. I was told I was trash. You don't build places for mothers and babies by allowing people to forget the value of basic human dignity. No one in the ballroom spoke because everyone suddenly realized the biggest loss that evening wasn't the $42 million. It was discovering exactly why it had disappeared. Nobody approached me when I stepped off the stage. Not at first. The room had become too quiet. $42 million had just disappeared from St. Catherine's. And everyone wanted to know why. Television cameras followed me as I walked toward the exit. I wasn't interested in interviews. I had said everything that needed saying. Then I heard someone crying. Dad. I turned around. Brooke was standing in the middle of the ballroom, still wearing the hospital bracelet from giving birth 3 days earlier. Mascara streaked down her face. Grant stood several feet behind her. He didn't try to stop her. He didn't try to speak for her. For the first time, he let her face the consequences alone. She slowly walked toward me. I'm sorry. I remained silent. I was cruel. Yes. I let other people convince me you were always trying to control everything. I looked toward Denise. She was already arguing with hospital executives across the room. Nobody was listening to her anymore. Brooke continued. I kept choosing the people who applauded me, instead of the man who spent his whole life protecting me. She started crying harder. I became someone Mom would have been ashamed of. Hearing Eleanor mentioned almost broke me. Almost then Grant finally stepped forward. I owe you an apology, too. You don't owe me one. I do. I heard every word Brooke said outside the delivery room. I could have stopped it. I didn't, because it was easier to stay quiet than disappoint my mother. There it was, the truth. Cowardice rarely announces itself. It usually hides behind silence. At that moment, the chairman of St. Catherine's board approached us. Not the hospital president. The chairman, an elderly woman named Judith Collins. I'd known her professionally for almost 20 years. She looked devastated. Victor, I had no idea. I believe you. She looked toward the maternity director, then toward the security supervisor, finally back at me. I've spent the last hour reviewing security footage. I frowned. What do you mean? The confrontation outside the delivery room. We have video. She took a slow breath, every word. Her voice became firmer. The nurses who stood there also submitted written statements. She paused. What happened to you violated every standard this hospital claims to represent. The ballroom became silent again. Judith turned toward the hospital president. As chairman of this board, I've called an emergency meeting effective immediately. Then she looked back at me. I can't undo what happened, but I can make sure nobody else is ever treated that way again. 3 weeks later, the results became public. The maternity floor manager who ignored the incident resigned. The patient relations director was replaced. Mandatory family dignity policies were introduced throughout the hospital. Every maternity employee, from physicians to security officers, was required to complete new training focused on respectful treatment of patients and families. Not because of my donation, because of what happened in that hallway. Meanwhile, construction officially began at Riverside Medical Center. The new building would carry only one name, the Eleanor Children's Pavilion, not Hale, not Victor, just Eleanor, exactly the way she would have wanted. 6 months later, I received another phone call, not from Brooke, from my attorney Caroline. I think you should come by. When I arrived, she handed me a photograph. My granddaughter, 6 months old, smiling. Along with the picture was a handwritten letter, not typed, not dictated, written entirely by Brooke. Dad, I don't deserve forgiveness. I'm writing because my daughter smiled at me today, and for the first time I understood something. If anyone ever made her feel the way I made you feel, I'd never forgive them. Yet I expected you to forgive me. I've spent 6 months trying to understand how I became so proud that I confused love with status. You brought flowers, you brought my favorite tea, you drove through a storm because you were excited to become a grandfather, and I called you trash. I can never erase that. I only hope one day my daughter grows up knowing the man I pushed away, because he's exactly the kind of grandfather she deserves. I folded the letter carefully. Carolyn asked quietly, "What are you going to do?" I smiled. "I'm going to meet my granddaughter." A week later, Brooke arrived alone, no Grant, no Denise, no photographers, just a young mother carrying a baby. She stood on my porch looking terrified. "I understand if you tell me to leave." Instead, I looked down at the little girl sleeping peacefully in her arms. She had Eleanor's eyes. My heart softened, not because Brooke had earned instant forgiveness, because that little girl hadn't done anything wrong. I gently lifted my granddaughter into my arms. She opened her eyes, looked directly at me, and wrapped her tiny fingers around mine. Brooke began crying again. "I almost stole this moment from both of you." I nodded. "Yes, you did, but we're here now." She looked at me through her tears. "Can we ever be a family again?" I answered honestly. "We can become one, but we won't become the family we were. That one ended the day you called your father trash. The new one has to be built on truth." 2 years later, the Eleanor Children's Pavilion opened its doors. Thousands of mothers and newborns would receive care there every year. Near the entrance stood a simple bronze plaque. It didn't mention the amount of the donation. It didn't mention my company. It simply read, "In memory of Eleanor Hale, who believed every child enters the world deserving love, dignity, and kindness." Every time I visited, my granddaughter insisted on holding my hand as we walked past it. She never knew about the delivery room hallway. She never heard the word trash. And that was exactly how I wanted it, because revenge isn't always watching someone lose everything. Sometimes, the greatest revenge is building something so meaningful that the people who rejected you must spend the rest of their lives remembering they chose pride over the person who loved them most.